InsightAI, powered by InsightJam.
I'm Doug Atkinson, and welcome back to the InsightAI podcast with my co-host, Doug Shannon. Doug, good to see you again.
Doug, good. Yeah, as always, great to be here, and we have a lot of fantastic stuff to talk about, so it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, well, actually, before we get to that, I can see a bit of the Batman logo in a new piece of kit you've got back there. What's the what's the new decorations?
Yeah, so usually with each show, I kind of secretly done it, but people have called it out to me and said, like, I noticed your background changes. I'm like, yeah, I try to do it with every episode just to make it something interesting to talk about, because even when on different interviews I get on, it's good to have stuff to point at and talk to. And so, yeah, the Batman logo is new. It was actually last week or so. I forget the actual date, but it was Batman's 85th birthday when he actually was released in comics for the first time and actually introduced. And so 85 years of Batman, and they some of the local movie theaters, it's actually like a popcorn tin, and you could like put popcorn. I'm not going to put popcorn in it, but in general, it was kind of neat to add that to the background. It's something that's a flavor there.
Well, I'll tell you what, that franchise has seen a thing or two. It is it's amazing how it's evolved, but it's going strong. I see cars in our parking lot all over these days with Batman logos, all kind of like emblazoned on various parts of the car.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it's a cultural thing, right? It's something that people relate to and they see like value in, or even their own belief systems, right? So people see value in that and like doing the right thing, or being, the hero or the superhero culture has really like kind of predominated for the last, especially recently in the last, like with the movies, stuff that Marvel's put out and everything like that. So it's exciting to see how it continues. And just like the Batman theme there is that 85 years, it's still growing strong. And never, I mean, there are some times where you could quote unquote say it jumped the shark and they did some crazy stuff, or some of the movies, it was like, whoa, hold on, what are you doing there? But in general, like they've done a really good job of reinventing it, re-showing, adding new people to it to really draw like what's going on. And really, actually, if you look at the history of Batman, you can kind of see how even our culture in the United States has changed over time, and they actually relate it to the different shows that are out. So it's actually kind of neat to see it that way too.
Yeah, they only lost control briefly during Arnold Schwarzenegger and Mr. Freeze.
Yeah. They're like, how do you do comic and live action at the same time? So.
Other than that, I think it's all been pretty solid.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of icons and imagery and logos, I guess there's a new one that just literally landed today in AI, and it's called Strawberry.
Yes, it's called Strawberry 01. And luckily I have props because I have children, so there's always children stuff to mess with. So in general, the Strawberry 01 just released today. It's actually open for, it's rolling out with all the premier subscribers of GPT, and it's looking really good. So right now, one of the use cases that one of the associate professors over at NYU, Ethan Mock, released something he tried with it. And what he did is, and just remember the fact that like 01 right now it's basically, it's like reasoning being added to some of the older LLMs that have been out, but it's actually a smart move for GPT, like OpenAI, right? They're like, how do we reinvigorate some of our older LLMs that, although are still very much in use, but how do we add more weight to them? How do we do more with them? And if you add reasoning like 01, or what is preferably known or previously known as like Q star, that kind of thing. So it has this reasoning, you're adding something to something. And so what Mock was able to do was he basically used it on a word search. It was like a word search, but it was like the classic like New York Times, you get like the crossword puzzle. And so he did that, and it actually worked out in about 108 seconds. It was able to solve the majority of it. Whereas in previous times in tests, LLMs have a very hard use case with this. The only thing that was very interesting is that using GPT-4 is still very literal, and it didn't quite understand one of the questions that was in there was like, what is a 4-letter term for like galaxy, and really word searches or crosswords are known for being like playing with words, right? And so it wasn't really looking for a galaxy. It was looking for like phone or cell phone or something like that. But it took it literally and was trying to find a name of a galaxy. It did find one, which is very interesting. But in general, that was a really good use case. And thanks to him for actually doing that, because showing the value of what this reasoning can do was super important. And there's going to be massive more stuff coming out from that. And so that's a quick win for those watching this. Like, hey, you know, what are you seeing? You know, I'd love to see it in the notes of the YouTube too. So
this has been widely anticipated, and this is not the full GPT-5, I guess. This is not that.
Yeah, this is just reasoning, right? This could be looked at as a precursor. It could be looked as a preview of what is to come with GPT-5, because if you take reasoning at this level, and some of the stats that are coming out right now, some of the testing that they've done are pretty fantastic, like PhD level testing. If you take this reasoning and you say GPT-5 was trained with this reasoning built in, we're going to see some amazing stuff with GPT-5 as well. And so it's hard to tell what yet. And I don't like to preface stuff if I haven't seen it, but in general, like that, it's pretty neat.
Well, it's just a breakneck pace at this point. There's just so many releases happening. I don't think we've ever seen revolutionary technology like this come out this way. I mean, not there were browser wars. I remember those, and mobile phones, I guess. There was a lot of iterations of Android and iOS kind of ping-ponging back and forth, but not like this. This is happening literally months apart, multiple times a year.
Yeah, I mean, the joking side of this, it's almost faster than Roblox can come up with a brand new game. So, because all these kids can make whatever game they want, but like brand new good ones and stuff like that. But it is kind of like mobile phones in a way, because mobile phones are able to iterate every year. You get a brand new one, that kind of thing. But even then, with like the Apple release that we just saw, you know, there was hope to get AI with that, or to get AI on the new Apple phone to where you can utilize it. But luckily, all we got was how to do AI and make our own emojis with prompts. So it's coming, but it's very interesting how they have to work that out.
It's back to the Batman story, right? This isn't going to take 85 years to evolve into something.
It's not.
It's literally, it seems like 85 days, and you have something absolutely mind-boggling, and away you go. If people haven't tuned their timelines, by the way, in their feeds, they really need to, because when these things hit, it's one of the great social experiments, the way people just react and start to
just, I mean, they just use it, and they use it for all kinds of things, which, and really by putting it into the public sector and seeing how the public and how people just utilize it in their day-to-day lives, that's really what's helping to drive this, because you have mass adoption, right? And not any tools or innovations that usually happen, if you have mass adoption from the start, you're going to get, you know, just a thoroughfare of just like massive changes and massive ideas. And that's the fantastic thing about, even like when Grok 2 released, you know, we saw it was very open. You could do basically whatever you wanted. And now we're even seeing that turn into like, wow, there's so many other ideas, and how can you train on that? And how can you do things with that you weren't able to do on other models?
It's like releasing a new chemistry set. It's not releasing a tool. It's releasing this collection of ingredients that you now are enabling people to experiment with. And much like a chemistry set, you might not want to necessarily mix some things together without some consequences downstream. But I think a lot of people, myself included, see these moments in time and say, okay, how do I take advantage? What does it mean to me? Like, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be utilizing Strawberry personally anytime soon, but I'm highly confident that there are very smart people somewhere who are taking all these bits of chemistry and saying, okay, I'm going to make you this thing that you're going to want, but it's not going to be ready yet for, a little bit of time. And so, just kind of, it's
See
coming,
what
but
happens.
sit back and
Yeah,
marvel.
I see somebody making a app or something that you can take any of these mail-in offers or sweepstakes that ask you to do something, and it basically answers all the questions for you. Or movies or shows like The Amazing Race or something no longer works because they just have their iPhone or something with them, and they're like, "What's this answer?" GPT with like strawberry on it or O1 on it to answer some of those riddles. Like it's gonna be nuts. Like it's definitely a much more enabled and massively ease of use focused world. And that's where we're going to see many things come out of it. Now, I mean, we could definitely talk about how a lot of these things, and this is like for venture capitalists and people that are listening, like if you're looking at these things and you're saying, hey, I want to invest in all these things, great, but how are all these people that are building these, what are they built on? And you'll find out the majority are either Llama, which is open source, which is great, it's actually doing really well, or they're all based on LangChain, right? And so when you have LangChain and you have these foundational models looking to go to more like the world model approach, like what we're potentially seeing with GPT-5 when it comes out, all of those people that are building on LangChain now might be in a heap of hurt. And all these startups that are doing that might not be able to do what they think they can do, because then if the big guys go and do it for you, why do they need you anymore? So for all those listening, just pay attention to that. You may want to look at building your own or work with those that are building their own and not be stuck on a technology that was maybe not always meant what it was supposed to be used as now.
Yeah, this is what's so fascinating about this time is we have these massively established forward-thinking technology companies that have been integrating AI into their incredibly well-developed systems, and they have so the greatest technology talent working for them, and they're recruiting that left and right. And it strikes me that anybody who emerges out of this is immediately going to be acquired. I mean, you just can't allow, they just will not allow. I mean, there's almost like no amount of money that they would not be willing to spend to allow somebody to pop up and compete or potentially dominate the space. I mean, it kind of like the way Facebook was snapping everybody up, like Meta and WhatsApp, and you just can't allow it if you're that technology company, and they have so many resources and so much money that they. And so the VC, and I think the VCs are playing a very cynical game here, where they're basically just laying down lots of bets, knowing full well that the acquisition market is going to be robust.
I definitely see some other side of that, right? Is where the majority of the companies that are picking up these people that are doing these things, a lot of them are also saying like no more remote work and stuff like that. And I kind of understand that, but then I kind of don't, because then what you're doing also is you're limiting your view to the Silicon Valleys, to the San Franciscos, to the Austin, Texases, to the New York. There's limitations there. You're going to get the same kind of viewpoints, the same kind of cultural understandings, the same kind of workers in that same spot, versus like, what about the rest of the United States, the world, what have you? And there's a lot of really good guys and girls that are near shore, that are still in the same time zones, that are massively underutilized, but want to be involved. And so how are they going to be involved? And so I think companies need to still realign back on like how they do HR, how they hire, what are they looking for, and can they supplement some of that? Because there are some big wins to get some of that perspective.
As I've often said, I think there are tech titans that have yet to emerge that are going to be that are going to come of age in this AI revolution, that are going to be dominant, much like the tech titans we all know today. And inevitably they just won't want to sell because they have a chance to do something truly amazing, and they want to be at that level. But I also don't think there's been a time quite like this for venture capital. I mean, we just saw a company receive a $1 billion seed round.
Yeah.
I want to say that again, just for emphasis point. A $1 billion seed round at I think it was a $5 billion valuation.
I think that's correct. Yeah. From what I read. Yeah. That was Ilya Sutskever,
who was the one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and who, by all accounts, led the coup against Sam Altman.
By chance. We have to keep it very. He probably played a part, but we don't know all the.
I'm not saying we know for sure, but there's been a lot of speculation that it was the reason why.
But I mean,
one could safely assume that it was along those lines. However, regardless, he's exited and immediately was provided with $1 billion worth of funding by venture capitalists to create what is being euphemistically called safe AI, or safe what are we looking at here?
Yeah, safe ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. It's interesting. I mean, Ilias has a background, especially in the developer community, especially the AI community, of being safe-minded, right? He wants to make sure it's like certain things like ASI don't get out and do anything. So artificial superintelligence is a potential future. Again, it's kind of the same. I would jokingly say, like, maybe he used the same pitch deck that OpenAI did, and OpenAI came out when they originally did and said, hey, we're going to go make AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's their goal. That's what they've named their goal for the longest time. And we haven't hit that yet. And so, but we need to hit artificial general intelligence before we hit artificial superintelligence. Although, however, it takes us as a species and as a community to build AGI, if it happens, ASI will come that much faster. So there are people that are worried about ASI. There's people that are worried about, like, what comes of that. What if it gets control? What if it doesn't? What kind of world does it come out after that? And so if there was someone to lead that effort, I think someone with a safety in mindset, and someone that has a lot of people out there are hopeful for this. And I mean, I'm probably one of them, because I think out of what I've seen from Ilias, he's done great things, amazing things. And he also really pushed for some of the red teaming early on. And then, OpenAI kind of changed that, and they kind of changed their style. And yeah, he probably had a voice in, like, hey, I'm kind of concerned where these guys are going, rightfully so. And then everything kind of changed a little bit. And so he did his exit as anybody would that had good, probably moral value or integrity. And so, hey, we'll see what happens. But definitely same kind of pitch deck, same kind of idea. And I mean, he's got a name for himself. He's a great speaker. He can like really dive into this stuff, and he knows the tech. So why not? But also, like, $1 billion is a lot. But when we're talking, this whole industry is talking billions upon billions, if not trillions, on the daily. Not even talking about the power structure and struggle that's needed to even survive these things. So,
well, again, the amount of money, I think it's an unprecedented amount of money that's being invested in this one particular nascent industry. I mean, there's never been anything quite like this. I mean,
right.
And as I said, it feels like almost a cynical game, where basically it's venture capital companies teeing themselves up to be bought by formerly backed venture companies, or formerly venture backed companies, to just, I don't know, the whole thing seems like it's just a big insider game at this point. And that
I can
a
see
lot
that.
of it is very cynical. That, we're going to launch all these really smart people. We're going to recruit them out of these proving grounds, and we're gonna send them on their way, knowing full well that companies that we've already funded and launched and have taken public potentially are gonna snap them up, and ultimately, I don't know, the whole thing feels a little bit
gamey.
Yeah.
Now, I definitely agree on a lot of aspects with that, right? Because in the VC realm of talking to many of these, and either a lot of times, like just like regular enterprise business or business and normal, they don't have all the right learnings, right? They don't know what's going on. Some of them have even heard about agents yet, or AI agents, or agentic workflows, or multimodal workflows, or frameworks, and so they don't have the understanding, and they're not there yet. And the funny thing is that if the VCs aren't there, then the enterprise users and or leaders are not even close, right? So the concern is, and what I've seen in the startup areas, is that the VCs aren't really, they're kind of, since it kind of happens, like it's normal human thing, is like when you don't know something, you're going to lean on people you do know that were successful. So literally anybody that has multiple exits or has a name for themselves, they have the attention, they're getting the money. But there are companies out there doing amazing things to the level of probably like some of the open AIs and these guys out there, and they're not getting the attention because they're potentially no-named, or they're doing it a different way, and it's not the normal, hype cycle, or it's not called agentic or whatever. Like there's all these things. It's like, who said that was right, everyone? Like, hold on. Like, we need to stop, the Dunning-Kruger effect. We need to stop thinking like this is the right way. People still think that everything's already been invented that hasn't. And so some people don't even try. The world is an open book at this point. To the point of the money being spent, I thought we'd be spending more money on space exploration at this point, not on AI and driving it to the point we're seeing. But it's still amazing because it's going to help, all ships get risen with the same tide, right? So it'll be interesting how that all plays out.
Well, and in fairness, I mean, we did see this in the .com bubble, where if you just had whatever it was .com, I remember lightbulbs.com for some reason pops into my head, but there was a lot of those types of things where you get a ridiculous valuation and away you'd go. But most of those, when the bubble burst, and I remember when it burst very specifically, they all crashed. I mean, that was devastation crashing. There may be a bubble here. I mean, there's, again, the amount of money is ridiculous, and
there's going to be, right? There has to be bubbles, and bubbles crashing, bubbles breaking doesn't always mean bad, but I think we've said that in the past. But in general, it's going to be around technology. It's going to be around what they're built on, and that's maybe some of the things we talk about in the next subject we're going to talk about. But in general, when it comes down to, like I mentioned about LangChain, a lot of people are building wrappers of AI, Gen AI on top of LangChain. So like, what if LangChain can't do the next thing? What if it gets kicked out? What if it's not the next big thing and you can't grow and you can't scale? What are you going to do? Are you going to go grab the next hype thing and wrap on that real quick? Like, that's what's causing disruption in the bad way in the markets right now. Enterprises can't trust some of this stuff because they're like, is it a wrapper? And then they have to ask questions like, what does that mean? What kind of wrapper? Back when we had the chatbots, 90% of all the chatbots out there were just a wrapper on top of Microsoft's own chatbot framework. So all these vendors offering this stuff, like, how can you trust them? And so now you just have to like find ones that are actually valid, find ones that you can trust, ones that are like actually transparent in what they're doing, so what they're doing. So then you can actually build and drive and go with them. But it's hard to know because there's just so many, and the hype is palatable.
Well, and this is, at Solutions Review, we see the enterprise technology side, and we're constantly having events with well-established enterprise technology companies, and they're constantly bringing out their AI functionality that is embedded into their well-established platform solution, and they've been at it for so long that it's pretty well bulletproof, because ultimately they're selling to the enterprise and it needs to be bulletproof. So these aren't so I don't see a lot of, honestly, I don't see a lot of room to run for an AI startup in the B2B kind of enterprise B2B side. And so the question is okay, so where's the B2C play? I mean, where's the real horizontal mass appeal going to happen? And again, you're now up against these incredibly well-established, huge horizontal network plays like Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and I don't know how something. I'm sure something will, because something always does find its way into a market product fit that just blows up. But I just don't. It's not as green a field as it used to be, because there's just so much already grabbed, so much land already grabbed.
I mean, and it's okay to see it that way, right? And a lot of people probably see it that way, that the land is already grabbed, it's already been spoken for. However, me being on the enterprise side and working with a lot of those entities and whatnot, AI and Gen AI is not as prevalent as it could be in enterprise yet, because of the platforms that are out there. And where they are enabled is definitely medium to smaller businesses. And so we do see more B2C. And so B2C, like your business to customer side, you're seeing people create workout apps that are AI enabled. You're seeing like apps on the marketplace now on the different cell phones that are enabled and driving that aspect of it. Now, when the medium-sized businesses start to get enabled, that's when we're going to see massive adoption and then a big push for enterprise. And although a large majority of companies out there that are doing Gen AI, and even ones that are doing agents or whatnot, are saying like, let's go get into enterprise, that's where a lot of them can't, because again, LangChain can't scale very well. And this is, again, like, some people need to probably do the research on it, but like in general, if you can't scale, you need to find those players and those people that can, and those are the ones that are going to matter. Because if not, then you're always going to be stuck using like the big three or the big four, since Mistral's doing some cool stuff with their new Pixtral that came out. That's a whole other story. But in general, be mindful, ask questions, and know that. And the thing is, like, you were talking about something, Doug, and an enterprise needs to start looking at one specific aspect. One, it goes back to the ontology. Understand your data, filter your data, categorize your data. If you don't do that, when the medium-sized companies start knocking on your door, you're not going to be ready to use Gen AI when it is finally ready to really drive and do all the different use cases that you couldn't even think of. But then you're going to have all the heat maps and everybody's going to be aware, like, this is where you hit. You won't be ready. But if you do look at it and you say, hey, this is what I need to know, we've done this up, let's drive it. And then you have the aspect of our enterprise can now drive it, build it, and we're maintaining our own data. We don't need to reach out to some of the big players. We don't need to go give data out so that can go make models on our own stuff. If you control your own stuff, you won't be the next Kodak Blockbuster and all that. So focus on what you're good at as an enterprise. Get your data in order. We've all said this for 20 years, just for record, get your data in order and don't make data swamps. But now is the time. Like, figure it out. Start working that directions, and that's the goal.
Well, so I mean, again, we see this as well, and it's not surprising to me. There's almost a paralysis that happens at the enterprise level,
analysis paralysis
in moments like this, where things are happening so quickly, and you're under pressure to make a move, but yet every time you think you should be making a move, something like strawberry lands or some other thing, in your peripheral vision is blowing up, and you think, well, wait a minute, do we? And I wonder, because I think there's also in this time a kind of a sense in the back, at least in the back of my mind, that it's like, it's okay if we sit on the sidelines for a little bit, because there's so much there's so much NOS in the button that anytime we decide to slam on it, we'll go as fast as we need to go. Because this isn't like the Industrial Revolution, where you have to wait for things to be built and then implement them, right? Or like robotics. This is just a digital implementation and a matter of just compute, and that's incredibly scalable and rapid, and you can catch right up even if you do sit on the sidelines for a little bit.
I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, like the classic adage, like Rome wasn't built in a day, but like a new AI system kind of is built in a day. But in general, you still have to test, and you still have to get, like I said, like the filtering and the categorization. You have to understand your data, and you have to start playing with it, because if you don't play with it, bringing it in, it does take time. And sometimes that 3 to 6 months time of like bringing all this in, unless you, and this is, again, this is why agents are coming in, because it's a speed to effort, right? You can work with a vendor, you can get an agent and do some interesting stuff with it, really drive some of that nuance and control all that using it or talking to an agent. And then you have your expert agents that are coming out by certain companies, and those are doing amazing things that are doing the same stuff like I've spoken about previously, where like your SME or your domain expert is highly enabled and you don't lose your tribal knowledge of your company. And so all that stuff is in play, but you still have, you almost need tactical teams that are driving this and testing it. So when you're actually ready to pull the trigger, hit the NOS and go fast, can we do it? How do we do it? And what does that look like? And that'd be the goal there.
So how do you do it? How do you think about it, Doug? I mean, this is like, in my mind, again, I think a huge problem in well-established and mature organizations. So what do we do with it? You know, we've been sanding and polishing the systems and the processes. We've got the smartest people that we could get our hands on who are developing the best possible processes, and they've used the best tools that they could get their hands on and implemented all that as best they could. And now you're saying, you know, I need to take advantage of all this AI to kind of transform my business even more completely. I mean, what do you tell somebody, an organization? Do you say, look, go talk to your consulting group and see what they have to say? Go get, you know, the big consulting firm to show up and give you some PowerPoint slides, or do you go on retreat and say, you know, what can we? I mean, how do you think? How would you recommend an organization think about what to do next?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of all, but not at the same time, right? So if you're an organization, say you're an enterprise, right? You're an enterprise, you have the options right now to bringing in an LLM and you want to do some of that. Well, I think we've talked about previously is like it's hard because there are two main use cases, like doing RAG models where you're talking to your data, or building knowledge base systems where you can actually do summaries and understand, like, get nuance out of there. And then, but where's the value in all of that? There is value, but there's hard to like define it. And the same thing with projects. You know, when you do a project at a company, you're like, we're going to do these 5 or 10. What are we going to do? What's the value out of it? With AI projects and Gen AI at the moment, you don't really have that number on the back end, and there's not enough commoditization there yet. There's not enough like wins that people have seen. You have people saying, oh, we're winning and we're not, and we are. But in general, there's not visibility. Like there is no, here's the massive business case. This is where you're going to win, go win. And so what you need is, yes, you need people definitely harp on this. Like your leadership should be learning now what they need to know about Gen AI. They should be doing testing. They should be learning learnings. Like they should be like doing different aspects of going out and doing maybe a retreat to go figure out and get your hands dirty.
But it is leadership, like, are they the most appropriate people to be thinking about this? It's almost like they
say no.
They're too far removed from it at this point.
Right.
That they're the least likely to be able to see the value of what this can do.
No, exactly. This is why I say
that
like,
it should bubble up from there almost should be kind of a skunk works approach.
Right. It's like a tactical team, right? So yeah, your leadership is definitely far removed enough that they're not going to want to go learn. They want people to do it for them. They want to use their individuals that they hired that are supposed to be smarter to go do this. So this is where you almost have to change the structure of an organization. And this is something I've been thinking about and writing on but haven't released it yet. But in general, it's a matter of like your leaders should just be understanding what's going on and having visibility to it, dashboarding, whatnot, just to have a clear view of what's happening. But they're not going to run it. They're not going to lead it. They'll give you some tidbits and kind of what direction they want the water to flow in the river, but they're not going to tell you how to make the river and whatnot. It's up to the managing teams and the managers on those teams or those leads on those teams to really be enabled to actually make the changes that they want to see, or have the stakeholder understanding and the leadership ability to actually lead through that of the teams that they have. Because the teams right now, the ones that are actually doing the work, that are working with the businesses, that are driving the IT teams, they want to be involved. They want to use this technology, but then they feel that they're being sandbagged either from leadership or they're not being enabled enough from the other side. And the business users are saying, I use this every day at home on my cell phone when I'm driving, and why can't I use that at my company? And the company's saying, well, we need to get this involved, but then they don't even know where to go at it. But again, like a Skunkworks or a tactical team can actually sit back and say, how do we drive this? What can we give back that is safe enough? Because not only is the fact that once you release this into the wild, it doesn't always go well. Like maybe your users that are, have been doing this a while on their phones have certain prompts that they use, and those prompts actually have prompt injections, or they're downloading pictures to get read, and those pictures have actual data and code in the backend that only talks to your LLM, for example. And so those are very dangerous things that we're still having on the enterprise scale. All enterprises have this issue of where phishing emails and all these other things are coming in that they can't block. And if you can't handle that security side, how are you going to handle a whole new area that has thought and things behind it that you can't control? And so there's worry.
Well, and this is why I say I feel like there's paralysis right now, a very large amount of paralysis, because in the end, there are pitfalls and booby traps in every direction. And actually, you know what? We're going to take a break. And when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit about another reason for concern. And that's, some of the first legislation is now coming forward. And it's significantly important, and it's not the last legislation that's coming. So we'll take a break and we'll get into it when we get back.
Solutions Review is inviting you to join InsightJam.com. What started a few years ago as a social media event to celebrate enterprise technology has now grown into an always-on tech community with live events, discussions, videos, vendor showcases, and industry resources. Our vetted roster of experts, thought leaders, and analysts are sharing tips and tricks daily. So if you're interested in getting involved, join the long list of companies and brands who have already participated by visiting InsightJam.com today.
All right, Doug, the conversation inevitably will always come back to regulation, right? This is a wildfire of technology right now, and it crosses into all kinds of complex issues with regard to privacy and copyright and intellectual property. And I mean, when you're basically hoovering all of the world's data into a large language model, complexity ensues. So let's talk a little bit about some of the moves afoot. So I know California is right now in the middle of creating legislation, fairly comprehensive legislation, as California tends to create. That is now, I believe, on the governor's desk, right? They've passed it in the houses, and now it's up to Gavin Newsom as to whether or not he's going to sign or veto the California AI bill. What can you talk about with regard to that?
Yeah, so it's definitely sitting with him now, and he has until the end of this month really to choose what he's going to do. I can tell you there's many people that have already contacted him about what's going on there and what he should or shouldn't do. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but in general, the aspect of it, though, let's talk about the point of it is, I almost think, so sometimes we have to remember even our own legislation is, although like you said, California tries to be very on par and up to beat on what's going on. We saw the same stuff with the EU Act. It took a long time. And sometimes what happens is, since it takes a long time to even talk about it, and the speed and the wildfire that is AI and Gen AI, it moves fast. And so it moves faster than we can talk about and really rationalize what to do. And so I think this legislation is probably 2 years too old. And I think the biggest reason why is because of the main thing that I could focus on it. Everything else seemed really good, but when it came to talking about a kill switch, and when people talk about kill switches, they want, how do you turn it off? Like when something goes bad, how do you turn it off when it's not what you want it to do? How do you, as a government, as a people, as a society, stop it? And you can't at this point. And the reason why, so 2 years ago we could have, I think roughly 2 years, like whenever Llama came out, I forget exactly when. So Meta came out with Llama. Llama was the first open source LLM, like large language model that came out. And open source is the same thing for people that don't know open source. Open source is open. It's open code that everybody can add to, everybody can change. Everybody has it downloaded. It's like having a movie, and everybody has the movie. So can you change it after you send it out? No, it's open source. It's open to the public. And the same way that Linux works, you have Microsoft, you have Windows, and you have Linux, and Linux is the open source version. It's changed and has many different forms because it's grown and changed so much. The same thing is going to happen to Llama being open source. It's going to grow and change and over time and do different things. But once it's out, it's out. There is no kill switch. There is no ability to do this. But part of the legislation talks about if you build AI or Gen AI models and you don't build a kill switch in it, they're going to sue the pants off you. So how does that work? And being the fact that Meta was the largest one to provide that an open source model, being Llama, like, are they going to be sued out of existence, or do they get grandfathered in and say, well, you're making an open source model, but we're going to now push and be punitive to everyone else that uses this? And so, well, that just hurts innovation. That hurts the fact that, like, they're not going to be able to change. They're not going to be able to innovate. They're not going to be able to drive new ways and new forks in this code to do amazing things, which is innovative. You're going to, and then you're not punifying the source, you're punifying everybody after. That's not fair. So how do you do that? And if you punify the source, do they go away? It's only a California bill. This is not a United States bill. This is not everybody has to abide by this. And it's interesting to see, like, if they it's going to be interesting to see what they say about the kill switch capability and what they do, because if they leave it in and it does get passed, I have a sneaking suspicion that Meta's going to say, we're going to go join Elon in Texas. And I think that's...
Yeah, so this is one of these... this feels a lot like the data privacy stuff, in that you have these kind of individual acts happening that just create a level of complexity. But in the end, truth be told, feel hard to enforce anyway. I mean, the GRDP or
GDPR.
GDPR. The GDPR bill in Europe, I think, was passed right before the pandemic. And then I think they realized after the pandemic hit that, you know what, we were really just trying to, it almost felt like a revenue haul out of the large tech companies and everybody else who was
seems that
potentially
way.
In violation. There was really no way to enforce it, or more to the point, there was no point in looking, because we'd probably find violations everywhere we looked. And so we'll just look at the biggest companies. We'll sue the pants off of them.
Yeah, it does seem like a way to
ridiculous amounts of money, and everything else will kind of just be better left alone. And California, I think, is the same way. I mean, California passed their great data privacy law, and in the end, it's like everybody just kind of like dances around it. And I don't think it's changed the world in any meaningful way. Companies are still getting breached. They're still playing fast and loose with their corporate data. It doesn't feel like it's had any impact whatsoever on any behavior, and it feels a lot like that's where we're going to end up in this instance. It's all more just kind of theater than real hardworking regulation.
I mean, sometimes that's where law comes in, right? So law goes to an extent it's very vague in some cases at purpose, and maybe they retool the kill switch thing to be more vague, and then they just use it as like the book, right? The book of, like, when they throw the book at you, like sometimes companies are made an example of, people are made an example of, and to make the rest of society understand, like, this is the norm or this is the example. And when they throw the book at you, the book is bam, kill switch. So and then here we're going to sue you for it. So
yeah, I mean, it also feels to me like, the people making these decisions and creating this legislation are the least qualified people on the planet to be talking about this technology. Right? They're just career politicians by and large who have no clue, and have been told probably through some sort of a lobbyist or some other,
there's a chance of that.
Well, entity, I mean, that this is what needs to be in there, and this is why, and it's all, just a bunch of inside baseball language that the sponsors have no real understanding for.
Right. Or really any skin in the game, right? Like, how are you
Exactly.
representing
None.
anyone if you have no skin in the game? And the one thing I thought was the most funny aspect of the California bill coming out was that everyone said, oh, it's great because Elon Musk approves it, or he thinks it's great. Elon Musk is not in California, everyone, just so you know this. Like, of course he approves. Of course he like endorses it. He's like, yeah, go do that. Because what happens is if they do,
he's already bailed and built his
he's like,
massive
hey,
AI
everybody,
data center.
come over to my side. Come to Texas, right? Like, I would endorse it too if I was a person of like him in that society, in that realm of like what he's doing, and saying like, yo, yeah, go for it. Alienate the rest of the state and see what happens.
Well, again, it isn't the first, and it won't be the last move by organizations. And in fairness, I mean, there are some larger points of emphasis that I think people are trying to get to. I know there's what's called a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights that the White House put forth that has kind of 5 larger talking points. And I know you've had some thoughts around putting together an AI Bill of Rights, but let's talk through some of these things while we have some time. So, there are 5 larger talking points that the White House has specifically called out.
Like safe and effective systems, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Systems
So
that are trustable.
let's go through them a little bit.
Yeah, so safe and effective systems. There's algorithmic discrimination protection, which is interesting. And there's data privacy, which is fantastic. And then there is notice and explanation. And then I think the 5th one is human. I got to read it real quick. Human alternatives, consideration, and fallback. That's a long one.
Yeah, right. I think I know where that one's going, but let's start with safe and effective systems.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, any AI, especially what we're seeing right now with like Grok 2 and the ability that it's open and can kind of say anything, and it's hard. I mean, how do you build a Bill of Rights without freedom of speech and some of these things, right? And so, what Grok 2 has done is it's given very, very open speech to do really anything, to the point of like, you could probably do an AI post over there and have a person screaming fire in a movie theater, and it's okay. That's like the ultimate form of freedom of speech, is doing something like that. But you should never do that in real life. But in a superlative way of doing with AI, like there's some cool function, because at the end of the day, I think, anytime I look at any of these 5 or an AI Bill of Rights in general, it should be looked at as a norm or a classification or just like a simple system so that we can all have a discussion or a conversation. Like at the end of the day, people have to say, these are like the rights or the inalienable rights that enable us as a society to say, here is a pseudo rule of law that we all have access to that says it's okay for us. And at which point we should be able to have a discussion around that, and a safe discussion, like an actual, it's kind of like we're having now, like we have a discussion about topics and do different things, but it should never go like past that. But yeah, so going through those, safe and effective systems, what is that in a Gen AI type of scenario or an AI scenario? And it has to be grounded on data. But then I think it's going to be hard, because all of the data supposedly that's been out there has already been ingested by these systems. And now to build these larger world models, they're using synthetic data. And so if they're using synthetic data, how can you then claim it's safe and effective, right? How can you can say, well, it's built off of and trained off of and grounded off of traditional data, but how is it safe and effective for everybody? And I think that's where some of these other ones come into play, where it's like algorithmic discrimination protection. Okay, great. And I think that came about because some of the early large language models were like, show me Germany in the 1940s. And you're like, wow, you have all these different races doing it. They're like, well, it's not quite right, but it's also not quite wrong. It's trying to be not discriminative, but it's not actually correct.
Yeah, when you try to instill your modern DEI sensibilities into
history,
historic, non-DEI sensitive events, and you
let's have
have
Genghis
the
Khan
system
have a bunch of
create.
like a multicultural race on horseback
I mean,
taking over the world.
it's so patently absurd because
Right.
because subjectively it's trying to be all things to all people throughout the history of the world, and the world just wasn't that way.
Right.
And for it to try to recreate history in this kind of perfect DEI mindset creates hilarity, but it also it almost creates red herrings around what it is that ultimately people are trying to do, which I think they're trying to do the right thing, but it displays itself as looking forced and in the end, I think it has the opposite effect in that it creates
we don't learn
perception that it's all a rigged game.
Right. I mean, it takes taking away a civilization's history is like taking away the fact that you can walk. Like you're never going to be able to grow and do more if you don't know where you came from. And we're never going to be able to learn as a society, as a civilization, if we can't look at the past and go, well, that wasn't cool. Let's go do it better. And if we're not allowed to critically think, we're never going to get past our own solar system. And like,
well, or I mean, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but to appreciate the fact that we are where we are as an advanced society because of the
learnings.
Sometimes not necessarily the most delicate behavior of our predecessors. That it required a certain amount of aggression and discrimination in order for things to advance the way they did. I mean, it was primitive in the perfect sense of the word. I mean, and to look back on that and not recognize it as part of an evolution rather than something that needs to be rewritten, I think it's a slippery slope.
It's dangerous on many accounts, just mainly because of learnings. But again, if you take the Industrial Revolution and you look in the past, and we had coal miners that didn't have masks. We didn't know. We didn't have the science. We had people that working on industrial lines. We had kids used to work on industrial lines and lose hands and fingers and stuff because they were kids. They shouldn't be working. We had to make laws and rules to change our society to know, how do we do it better? How do we protect certain ages and certain groups and certain things? And again, with the AI age that we're in, we're going to have to find some kind of middle ground of what that looks like, but do so not alienating our past and not doing justice or not doing right to our ancestors, right? Our ancestors had to live through certain things. Their history, it sucked. Like no clean drinking water, all that stuff. So
well, and again, the protection here, I think, is that when you take data from the past that may include some bias, and you port that into a large language model, and then that large language model is doing some generative
understandings.
Yeah, you may end up with
reasoning
algorithmic inequity, and as a result, that's not good. We definitely don't want that. And so I think it's a legit. I mean, it's a legit, whatever we would call this, right? Blueprint.
It should be asked. You want to. It depends on how. I don't know how far they're taking it in the text, but in general, it depends on. It's one of those things like, and a lot of stuff with the Gen AI space, like it's a lot of like, do your checks and balances, check your code to make sure it's like this, do some prompts to test it out. But you never really know, because I mean, there's also model drift and stuff like that. So how do you always ensure correctiveness? And you're I don't know if you're going to get that, but you're never going to get that with a human either. So then it's like, well, where's the line? So there's situations there.
Well, and that's why I think, like any Bill of Rights, you're going to have room for interpretation.
Yes.
And it's almost impossible to create it in such a specific way, which is why in the end, you will probably end up in some sort of judicial adjudication of what the rights are, much like our current Bill of Rights, and all the wrangling that goes on at the court level when you're talking about trying to enforce or adhere to those rights. But let's talk about some of these other ones. So the
data privacy is probably next, and
data privacy, right?
Privacy is huge.
That's a dandy.
And that's something I see really coming in the Gen AI side a lot, because again, like all the data has been gobbled up and whatnot, and they want more. And then if there's more to get, they're going to go find it. And at which point do we say that people have a right to their own privacy and have a right to maintain that privacy? We still have, I know friends and stuff that I know on the daily go, man, I don't know why, but all of a sudden we were talking about this thing last week and I have ads to go buy this thing on my phone. I wonder why. And somehow that's still okay in some regards. And most people,
we all get that happens to everyone that I know, including me, and we all chuckle and
you shouldn't be
go on with our day.
You should be going, what the heck is this and why?
Exactly. There was no consent there.
There was no
none.
consent. And that is the craziest thing I think it's,
or maybe there was consent. I'm sure there was actually.
Well, you probably signed a thing
somewhere that I agreed to in order to get something someday years ago.
Every time they update their stuff and it pops up at the right appropriate time, where you're like, just get out of my way. And then you're like, I don't even know what I signed.
Didn't Disney, not to go off on the rails here, but didn't Disney just like in a court case about some action that happened in one of their parks? They were being sued by a patron for something that happened in their park, and their defense was that person didn't have the right to sue them because they
signed
they agreed
on
Disney
the streaming
Plus's
service.
end user's license agreement that somewhere in the Disney Plus agreement says you can't sue any of our parks or properties for anything.
Which is how is that related?
I just love that. It is just so perfect that we all know. I mean, and again, we all just sit there and scroll and hit click agree because we just want the goddamn functionality of the app, and they just abuse you. There's a great South Park episode which we won't get into around.
But I think that should be part of the Bill of Rights, right? Is like the fact of like there should not be abuse. It is way too easy. We like we talked about, like we've lost the social media war. Social media is Looney Tunes. It's listening to us. We've lost a lot of our rights, a lot of our own personhood rights in general, and our data. And data privacy is not something that's in social media. And if it's going to be in AI, how are they going to not marry the two? Because they're going to be very much intertwined. And the algorithms on the social media side 100% tie into the AI side. And so I don't see, there's a lot of concerns there. And I wish that part of like the Bill of Rights that the White House is talking about, or even a Bill of Rights that I would like to talk about, is in general is it's the fact that like you should not be like the Turing test. Like you have the right not to be fooled.
I have this strong belief that we should be able to monetize our individual data to a
certain extent. Like if I want to monetize my healthcare data, or I want to get into something,
that where we should end up. And if anybody wants to try to start creating some real legislation that's going to have real meaning for real people, it's to give people the power over their own data, so that corporations, every day we exchange our data for value, and sometimes it's implied and sometimes it's not so implied. But that's effectively what we do every time we fill out a form in order to get something, or every time we download a lead. We become a lead, I should say.
Yes.
Right. And those leads all have incredible value. And if you were to add up all the value of all the leads you were over your lifetime, it would be, I would argue, maybe tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your data has been monetized in an actual monetarily significant way, thousands of times, and you didn't receive any of it. You received the value of the exchange. But what I believe where we should go is that each of us represents a value of data, and that when we deliver our data, the agreement should be, you will pay me for my data, just like you would be able to pay the third party that's collecting my data and then selling it to you. That it should be a one-to-one transaction, and it should be transparent. And in the end, honestly, I think you'd become a better lead anyway, because you would have been given whatever it is, $25,
access,
$50,
probably.
$100.
And then you're more apt to actually add into it. You're more apt to actually provide structure or whatnot, versus them just like tagging metadata. They would actually have access and know. But I mean, you can then choose, like, I'll give you all this, but I'm not going to give you my social, or I'm not going to give you my address or whatnot.
Well, and then if it gets breached, you know what? I was part of it. It wasn't, I'm hearing about it after the fact. I sold my data into that data set that got breached. I appreciate that. That's my bad.
And that's where it comes into, like, you know, lawsuits should be happening, but they're not happening. And if the lawsuits were happening, then more people and more companies would actually look to doing stuff like this, to getting buy-in, like actual buy-in, and providing value back, or even like pennies on the dollar. But still, some people would want to be a part of that. And if they are signing that, then they are signing that. And that's a legitimate, like, hey, you can't sue us because you literally gave us your signature on DocuSign or whatever. So it's definitely, that needs to come in. And then I think that should be part of probably the Bill of Rights, and that may be part of this data privacy if that's what they're looking at. But in general, if that goes that way, we do need to look at the social media side too, because of how that's looking. And our kids, every kid's on there, as adults we're on there, and even just like swiping on a actual thing, or social media platform, like, that's still providing, there's a lot of information that I can get off of Twitter and whatnot, but then you have to tailor that. And if you don't tailor it, you just end up getting like literally this echo chamber of like the same stuff. And you're like, whoa, I don't want that. I want this. And then you have to kind of choose that. And so again, like, we also need to teach people how to do that, because some people don't realize you have to prune your own feeds. And if you don't, you're just going to get stuff that you may not want, and understand, like, this stuff changes how you think. This stuff changes how you interact with others and what you believe. And that's the power of social media. That's the power of AI.
Well, I think it'll be fascinating as well when we get to a point where our avatars are indistinguishable from ourselves, and as a result, what data they do have about us is being leveraged against a digital replica who has a way different attitude and has the patience, or maybe not the patience, or maybe even has, a certain amount of powers, artificially intelligent powers, super intelligent powers, that may be able to be offensive as well as defensive.
Yeah,
I think we're heading in a very interesting direction.
It is, and who knows if we're going to hit the ASI, the artificial super intelligence side. Who knows if we're going to hit AGI?
We're going to hit it all, man. We're going to hit it all. We're going to hit it all. There's just no way to stop it, and it's just a matter of compute in the end. I mean, we've cracked the code for neural networks. When you port all of this data together in these large language models, and you speed up the compute, and you've created a neural network that is only getting more and more vast in terms of its ability to learn and predict.
Right.
This is, we're going to go so fast, and it's going to be so complete that the impact of social media on humans is going to be a flea speck compared to what this is going to do.
Right. So then, on that same topic, like, shouldn't we take the example of social media? Like, we lost that. We understand how bad it is. We need to fix it if we can. But we now have Gen AI that's much faster than social media, has more implications, has more potential controls or implications of, like, helping us think one way or the other. We have to have some kind of Bill of Rights. We have something to protect us from not only ourselves, but from the technology impacting us, from the technology changing us. Because if we go down the same path, just like we were talking about it, if we allow our history to be manipulated, erased, or not utilized with a high surmountable amount of truth, we're never going to be able to go further. And we're going to probably I hope we don't devolve into something else, right? But like in general, we need something that says like this is what we need to make sure that we keep things copacetic, we keep things on the up and up, we keep things very protected, because we're being, this is like a war of attention. It's a war of who controls who. It's a war of algorithms at the end of the day. And if we're not looking at this importantly now, we're never going to be able to stop it. And so we have to take a human first approach. We have to take a very like, if we're like, we just have to pretending like we're all going to not be the smartest thing in the world. We're, humans are going to be second rate. What does that mean to us? Like, let's have the discussion, like a real discussion, and then say like, how do we protect that? Because that's not good.
Well, it's again, it used to be, I was looking at this the other day. It used to be so much easier to pass an amendment for the United States. You could pass amendments. They passed them quite regularly when the world was devoid of information for the most part. It was easy to get consensus. It was easy to pass. It was easy to get the states to ratify. Amendments were getting passed left and right for the first 150 years of our union. But recently, it's been few and far between, and I would argue that it's nearly impossible now, primarily because, and maybe this is an unfixable problem, the way that information has now pervaded both sides of the political spectrum to the point where politics has never been more divisive,
Muddied. Yeah.
Information has never been more suspect, and the tuning of messaging has never been more complete, where you can be in such an echo chamber that you honestly believe that the other side is crazy.
Right. To that point.
Because of everything you've been told, that they are literally crazy.
That we're all
believe
human,
that. And to the point where you want them to not be able to say things out loud because they are completely wrong in your mind.
Which again, like we're losing the ability to talk.
To the point where everything that they say is clearly wrong, and we can't allow them. And this is where we are. You can't allow this other side to say things. So we need to limit free speech, because their free speech is
not
100% wrong,
which is crazy.
In my mind, it's crazy. It's crazy, and this is where I think we, like I said, it was easier to get consensus years ago. I don't know that we'll ever be able to get to a point, but it strikes me, I guess, to bring this full circle, that we are at a kind of an amendment moment, or maybe it is an addendum to the Bill of Rights or whatever it is, but that this is such an important point that we do need to have almost a rethinking of our society, much like we did when we generated, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We sat down and said, we're going to start new in this new nation and build something brand new. I think we're entering a point where we need to have that mindset.
The same way that enterprises need to be retooled to move faster and to be able to know what's going on. Like if you have like a C-suite and that's like your politicians, right? And you have your middle grounds doing the work, it does have to be retooled, because the people doing the work don't have the stakeholdership, don't have the leadership, don't have the ability to say this is the way, because they're still waiting on these leaders to make a choice. And the leaders don't have the information. And so we cannot expect leaders to have the right things to say if they don't have the right people engaged to get the right governance and structure to get the job done. And so if those lower groups can't do the job, there's issues. But going back just to the point of, why in the past was it easier to do amendments? I mean, we can say a lot, we can say all kinds of stuff, but in general, we had the media, right? The media that we had available to us, newspapers, the media we had available was like articles and magazines, and we still have some of this. We don't have newspapers anymore because it's online, but the media, I mean, you remember some of these news anchors, and they were revered as being non-biased. Like there was a goal to be as non-biased as possible.
Yeah. I mean, Walter Cronkite and David Brinkley and some
They're
of the
like
kind of
amazing
classics
people,
from
and
the 60s and
we
post-war.
don't have those. We don't have those people
But
anymore.
in fairness, I mean, pre-war, I mean, you had the muckrakers and there were some pretty bad journalists back in the in the Tammany Hall days.
But like you had like these ones that were known to be like those pillars in the community. Like, okay, that one gives me not biased information. This
in fairness, you're absolutely right. There were people who were playing it down the middle who had a certain amount of journalistic integrity, and there was a code of ethics, a journalistic code of ethics.
And they took responsibility for themselves, right? They took responsibility on themselves to have integrity and to say, this is my line. And integrity and responsibility and some of these things are kind of lacking in today's space.
When you're rewarded by the click and that's the only compensation you get these days is clickbaity payments, you're going to end up with what we've got now, which is
so we're gamifying responsibility and integrity out of our society.
I think we should maybe pause our conversation here.
It's been a long one. So.
Because there's so many things that we can talk about, and we can just keep going. But I want to keep some of our powder dry here and come back at this next time we talk, because there's a wealth of stuff here that we can get into, and
again, it's changing every day, right? So there's always a ton more to talk about, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate it next time, Doug, and it's always been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, Doug, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you soon.